What if I told you a forgotten piece of Cold War history just fell from the sky, 53 years after it was launched? Imagine something built in the 1970s, older than mobile phones, the internet, and even most satellites, finally coming back down to Earth. No loud warning. No breaking news coverage. Just a silent fall into the vast Indian Ocean, far away from any eyes. It wasn't a meteor. It wasn't space junk. It was a piece of a secretive Soviet mission, Kosmos 482. A spacecraft once meant to land on Venus. Now it has finally returned home. But not the way anyone planned. Back in the early 1970s, the world was racing to conquer the final frontier. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union had reached fever pitch. The Americans had just landed on the moon. The Soviets, however, had their eyes set elsewhere, Venus. The goal was clear: to be the first to land a working spacecraft on our neighboring planet and send back data from its scorching, toxic surface. It was a bold ambition, and one that led to the launch of Venera 8. But hidden in the shadow of that mission was another spacecraft, Kosmos 482. On March 31, 1972, the Soviet Union launched Kosmos 482 from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. To the public, it was just another satellite in their long-running Kosmos series. But experts outside the Iron Curtain knew this wasn't a regular satellite. It was actually part of the Venera program designed to reach Venus. However, something went wrong. Just moments after launch, the upper stage of its rocket malfunctioned. Instead of sending Kosmos 482 toward Venus, it left it stranded in Earth's orbit. Stuck, confused, and silent. An interplanetary traveler that never got to leave its home. For decades, Kosmos 482 quietly circled Earth. It became a ghost in the sky. Occasionally tracked by space agencies, occasionally forgotten. Some pieces of it did fall to Earth, including a few heavy fragments that crashed into New Zealand just months after the failed launch. But a significant chunk, possibly the descent module built to survive Venus' brutal atmosphere, remained trapped in space. Orbiting, decaying slowly, patiently waiting for gravity to pull it back. And now, over half a century later, that moment has finally come. In May 2025, multiple space tracking systems noticed a fast-moving object re-entering Earth's atmosphere. At first, it was unclear what it was. Some thought it might be old rocket debris or a defunct satellite. But the speed, trajectory, and historical records soon pointed to something far more interesting. It was Kosmos 482, the Soviet Venus lander that never made it. The spacecraft that had been waiting in low Earth orbit for 53 years. And after all this time, its long journey ended not in triumph or celebration, but in a silent plunge into the Indian Ocean. No witnesses. No photos. Just a splash somewhere far from land. Experts believe it was the descent module of Kosmos 482 that finally came down. This isn't just a thin piece of aluminum foil like most satellites. The Venus descent capsule was built like a tank. Designed to survive temperatures over 900 degrees Fahrenheit and pressures more than 90 times that of Earth's. In other words, if anything could make it through a fiery re-entry, it would be this. The sphere is about 1.2 meters in diameter and weighs over 500 kilograms. It's surrounded by a thick titanium heat shield. And that's likely what allowed it to survive the fall, again. Back in 1972, 4 pieces of the original Kosmos 482 mission fell into New Zealand. One fragment crashed into a farmer's property and buried itself deep in the ground. Another struck a tree. Authorities examined the debris and found it had markings in Cyrillic script and was made of titanium, not a common material for Earth-based objects. The Soviet Union, as expected, denied any involvement. But experts had no doubt. These weren't parts of a plane or missile. They were from a failed interplanetary probe. A piece of a Venus lander that had never left Earth's gravity. The return of Kosmos 482 in 2025 has sparked new interest in the story. It's a reminder of just how long space hardware can stay in orbit, and how unpredictable re-entries can be. Some scientists had predicted Kosmos 482 would re-enter by 2023. Others said it might take until 2027. The actual date turned out to be right in between. It's a difficult calculation, affected by everything from atmospheric drag to solar activity. The slightest change in the sun's radiation can expand Earth's atmosphere just enough to slow down orbiting objects, and bring them down sooner than expected. And it raises a deeper question. How much else is still up there waiting? Earth's orbit is filled with thousands of defunct satellites, broken rocket stages, and mysterious space debris. Some are tracked daily. Some are lost entirely. Each one is a reminder of past missions, forgotten ambitions, or mistakes that never got cleaned up. Kosmos 482 isn't the only relic of its kind. but it is one of the oldest and most unique. It wasn't just another satellite. It was a spacecraft meant for another world. It carried science instruments, parachutes, and possibly even a radioactive power source depending on which variant it was. If the descent module did indeed survive the fall and sank into the Indian Ocean, it's likely still intact on the seafloor. Built to withstand the crushing pressure of Venus, it can easily handle the pressure of Earth's deep oceans. And that opens up an intriguing possibility. If it could be recovered, something incredibly difficult but not impossible, it would be a one-of-a-kind Cold War artifact. A time capsule from a different era of space exploration. An object that was meant to land on another planet, now resting quietly at the bottom of our own. Of course, recovering it would be expensive and technically challenging. The exact splashdown location isn't known, and the Indian Ocean is vast. Even if the approximate area could be narrowed down, finding a 1-meter metal sphere on the ocean floor would be like finding a marble in a football field, underwater. But still, the story alone is valuable. It reminds us that space isn't just about the future. It's also full of stories from the past, some still unfolding decades later. Some returning to us like ghostly echoes from missions that never reached their destination. And while Kosmos 482 never made it to Venus, it did accomplish something strange and poetic. It orbited Earth longer than most satellites ever will. It survived multiple decades, multiple generations of technology, and multiple shifts in global politics. When it launched, the Cold War was in full swing. The Berlin Wall stood tall. There was no internet, no smartphones, no reusable rockets. And yet, through all of that, this spacecraft silently circled our planet. Unseen, unheard, until it finally fell unnoticed into the sea. Even the way it came down says something about the nature of space. Quiet, inevitable, hidden in plain sight. There were no explosions, no rescue missions, no breaking news alerts. Just a spacecraft returning to Earth long after the world had forgotten about it. It reminds us how long our actions in space can echo. How a launch in 1972 can come back to us in 2025, like a message in a bottle, drifting through the void for over 50 years. But what if Kosmos 482 had succeeded? That's the thought haunting historians and space enthusiasts alike. Imagine if it had escaped Earth's gravity and reached Venus as planned. It would have landed just 2 months after the successful Venera 8 mission. Instead of being remembered as a failed object lost in orbit, Kosmos 482 might have been the second successful Soviet lander on Venus, cementing the USSR's dominance in interplanetary exploration at the time. But a single malfunction changed that path forever. One failed stage, one incorrect command, and a bold mission to another world was reduced to debris in Earth's sky. Venus was always a brutal target. Temperatures hotter than a pizza oven. Pressure strong enough to crush a submarine. Sulfuric acid clouds thick enough to melt metal. Most spacecraft don't survive more than a few minutes on its surface. That's why the Soviets designed the Venera capsules, including Kosmos 482's descent module, to be nearly indestructible. Thick titanium walls. Protective layers against acid. A heat shield strong enough to endure hell. Even after all these years, it's likely that Kosmos 482's core remained unchanged. It was built not just to land, but to endure the worst environment in the solar system. That same toughness is what helped it survive 53 years in Earth orbit. Most satellites decay within a few decades, if not deliberately deorbited. But this wasn't ordinary space junk. It was a machine built to crash land on a planet. So when its orbit finally decayed enough, it re-entered Earth's atmosphere with terrifying efficiency. No disintegration. No burning up like a shooting star. It punched through the sky like a cannonball and made it to the ocean, most likely still in one piece. That alone is a testament to Soviet engineering, and a chilling reminder of what kind of objects still exist above us. But the crash also reignites long-standing concerns. What exactly was on board Kosmos 482? The Soviets were notoriously secretive about their space programs. Some believe it may have carried a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, or RTG, using radioactive material to power its systems. These were used in many deep space missions, including American ones. But if that's true, it means a small amount of radioactive material might now lie at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. While such devices are heavily shielded and not dangerous unless tampered with, it adds another layer of mystery to an already strange story. And it's not just history enthusiasts paying attention. Military and intelligence agencies around the world quietly track old Soviet space objects. Why? Because these relics, especially those using exotic materials or radioactive elements, still matter. If a foreign object like Kosmos 482 crashes into international waters, the race to recover it becomes more than just scientific. It's strategic. Secrets of old technology, metallurgy, shielding, and engineering are still valuable, even after 5 decades. That's why, behind the scenes, nations may already be analyzing satellite re-entry data, calculating coordinates, and debating whether to send an expedition to the ocean floor. Meanwhile, amateur satellite trackers and astronomers have long followed Kosmos 482's strange orbit. In online forums, people watched it inch closer to Earth year after year. They knew it was special, not just because of its age but because of its potential historical value. Some even predicted the re-entry window down to the month. But despite that accuracy, no one was able to visually capture its final fall. That's the strange paradox of modern space tracking. We can know an object's trajectory within meters, but still fail to witness its descent. Space doesn't make dramatic exits. Most of the time it slips away quietly. And then there's the public. Most people never even heard of Kosmos 482. It wasn't on the news. It didn't trend on social media. And yet, it's one of the oldest spacecraft to ever return from orbit. That tells us something important. Space history is filled with forgotten missions. Failures erased by time. Ambitions left circling the planet for decades. But occasionally, one of them comes back to remind us of what once was. Kosmos 482 is more than a broken satellite. It's a messenger from a different era, one that most people today never lived through but can still learn from. That era was defined by risk, secrecy, and relentless innovation. The Soviets pushed boundaries without fully understanding what they were about to face. They sent probes to Venus before they had proof anything could survive the trip. They built landers like Kosmos 482 in underground factories, kept far from the public eye. The spacecraft were tested, modified, and launched under code names, buried in the massive Kosmos numbering system, designed to hide failures among routine launches. Kosmos 482 wasn't supposed to be known to the public. Its identity as a Venera-type probe was confirmed only years later, through data leaks and reverse engineering. And even today, its true story remains incomplete. We may never know how much of the spacecraft survived. We may never find the exact place it hit the water. But in a way that's fitting. Kosmos 482 has always lived in the shadows, misidentified, misdirected, and misunderstood. First it was disguised as a routine satellite. Then it became an anonymous chunk of orbiting metal. Now it's an ocean relic swallowed by the deep. But in each form, it has outlasted expectations, outlived its creators, and outshined many newer, flashier missions that have long been forgotten. Its fall also gives us a sobering lesson about space debris. The more we send into orbit, the more risks we create for the future. Today, thousands of satellites orbit the Earth. Elon Musk's Starlink program alone has added over 5,000 small satellites in just a few years. China, India, Europe, and private companies are all adding to the numbers. But only a few of these objects are tracked with precision. Most are left drifting, waiting for gravity to pull them down. What happened with Kosmos 482 could happen again. And next time, it may not fall into an empty ocean. If a heavy object like that re-enters over land or a populated area, the consequences could be dangerous. Even a small titanium fragment falling at high speed could damage property, or worse. That's why agencies like NASA, ESA, and Roscosmos are now investing in better tracking systems and even missions to actively remove space debris. Because if we don't start cleaning up, space might become too crowded and too risky for future generations to explore. Kosmos 482 is a warning wrapped in a history lesson. A relic from the past that points directly at the future. But beyond all the risk in science, there's something poetic about this whole event. A spacecraft built to fall to Venus ended up falling back to Earth. A mission designed for another planet returned to the one that built it. It's almost as if the Earth was calling it back. After 53 years of silence, of drifting above us like a forgotten ghost, it finally answered. It returned not with fire and glory but with humility. No grand celebration. No recovery team. Just a quiet descent into the sea. And perhaps that's the way it was meant to end. Not every story needs applause. Some stories are powerful because they unfold in the background, slowly, patiently, silently. Like Kosmos 482, a spacecraft that never completed its mission. But in doing so became something even more interesting. A floating museum. A satellite turned survivor. And now, a memory sunk in the ocean, resting where no eyes can see it, but where its story can finally be told. In the end, the fall of Kosmos 482 is not about failure. It's about endurance, It's about how a piece of technology outlived an entire nation, watched the world change from above, and then returned, still intact, still real, still waiting to be found. It's a message in titanium from the past to the present. A reminder that nothing launched into space is truly lost. It always finds its way back, one way or another. And if one day, decades from now, some deep-sea team stumbles upon a round titanium object covered in algae and salt, they might not know what it is right away. But someone will remember. Someone will say, "That's Kosmos 482. That's the one that fell after 53 years. And just like that, the story will rise again, out of the depths, out of history and back into the light.